I'm Aeja.
And today we're going to be talking to you guys about higher education. And I think that what we can start off with is something that everybody who deals with higher education to some degree is going to kind of be interested in. I don't know if you want to share a little bit of your personal journey with higher education.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'm from Hollister. I'm currently in Hollister, even though I'm now a junior in college because of COVID. But yeah, I went to public school my whole life, and then now I go to Columbia University, which is private school. It's like the Ivy League. It's in New York City. It's as different as I possibly could have gotten from going to public school my whole life in like a fairly small town. Like Hollister's not super big. And yeah, it honestly still kind of feels a little bit like an accident. Like, I'm like, how did I get there? Kind of, it's like this like miracle kind of, especially just because I feel like a lot of, I don't know, I just like the idea of college was like kind of fuzzy in the back of my head. Like, yeah, that's something I guess I should be, or I am shooting for, but I was never somebody that had like a dream school, I guess, or a really like targeted approach to how I was going to get into college. So, yeah, I don't know. Where are you at? How did you get there a little bit? If you want to tell people.
Um, I always kind of describe myself as like a first and a half generation college student because my mother actually started going to college when she stopped during her first semester. And so she started back up when I started high school. And so we right now are in college together. And so it's always been kind of interesting. I'm from Oakland and I attend San Jose State University. I'm in my second year. And it's been interesting because with that experience, it's kind of like, um, I get to see my mom navigate it with me. And so she kind of understands parts of it. And so she's understanding the more current parts of it, which to me is like, of course, like parental support, I think it's one of the biggest facets of like, can people succeed or not, even in just the transition from high school to college. And so it's always interesting to me how like my mother as a college student, like she could understand like what I'm talking about when I'm saying like, I need my FAFSA in right now, like because she's going to college and doing all these things like at the same time. But for me, I think because my parents hadn't been able to finish college before they had me, that I had always been very like, what college am I going to? Like, because that was something that they had almost ingrained into me because it was something they didn't get the chance to do.
Yeah.
And so when I was growing up, I mean, before I knew what it was, I was like, I want to go to UCLA or I want to go to NYU, like things that I would just see people on TV say.
Yeah.
Going that, or like where I would see them dorming at on movies and stuff and be like, oh, that's so interesting. And
Mm-hmm.
so for me, college was always just like, I don't know if I even always saw it as a goal, if as so much as a phase of life that I was so excited to always enter. And I had always like thought of it like that. And I think that that's a really privileged way to think of college.
Totally.
Definitely like just as something that you enter into after high school. But that was very much the culture of my high school. I had like a really private school and high school experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, I kind of experienced just transitioning to college almost um, not lowering my standards, but expanding my standards, I think, to what I thought like a good education is or what like quality education is. Because, of course, like I love my university, but I won't say San Jose State is like the second university in the country or anything. It's definitely not Ivy League. And so it was, for me, definitely accepting like that my college experience might not have been the same thing as like the rest of my peers because I couldn't afford necessarily whatever they were having or it just wasn't for me. But also like kind of leaning into my college experience. I know I got here kind of like it wasn't my first choice. And so I know a lot of people who go to their first choice schools, they have an easy time falling in love with it. But when you go to a school that you kind of like had to accept as a consolation prize, you
Mm-hmm.
really do have to realize like education is education. And that's definitely like what I learned now. I think I'm at the perfect place for me. And I think like I would not want to change universities if Harvard, Princeton, and Yale all gave me like full stay. I
Yeah.
just, it definitely taught me, and I'm definitely still learning that like education is everybody's like own personal journey.
Mm-hmm.
And I just have been experiencing like like a public college is perfect for me. I don't know if I would have like been right at a private college. So I definitely have been like learning like the differences just between even my experience and then my sister's experience. She goes to Howard, went to Howard University, and just learning like what the difference even is between how private and public school administrations are and like the resources they have to offer. It's just been really like, I guess, just a new life experience altogether for me.
Yeah, totally.
I guess we're getting into like the difference between public and private. So I know you go to a private university. I don't know if you want to contrast any of the things that you've noticed between your private university and like public ones.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's definitely, I guess, I mean, one, I don't entirely know. Obviously, I'm not currently going to a public university. Like, I didn't transfer, and I think transfer students have a lot of interesting things to say. But, I mean, I went to public high school, and all of my friends are currently going to public schools or, like, public colleges. And for me, I guess just, like, experience-wise, going to a private school, like, the biggest shock for me, I guess, was, like, just, like, the demographic of the school is, like, so wildly different from like any group of people that I've experienced before, and like the amount of even just like wealth that like resides in like one Columbia dorm is like mind-boggling. I'm almost, not even almost, I'm certain that I have met like richer people at Columbia than I have ever met ever before going to college, and that's like a crazy thing. It's really different from like living in a small town and like feeling like someone was really wealthy if they like had a pool in their backyard or whatever. It's like it's such different standards from coming from a small town to going to like one New York City. Like Columbia is like one of the most expensive schools like in the country, I'm pretty sure. Like it's just crazy. And then like to learn like after like some amount into freshman year, I learned that like 50-ish% of people like don't get financial aid, and that like blew my mind. I was like, what? Like it costs like $70,000 or something a year to like live at Columbia fully, and I was like, I don't even know what I thought was happening, but it wasn't that people were just fully paying $70,000 a year. It was like really crazy. But something that you said that I think like resonated or whatever, like that I relate to, is that college was something that was always sort of pushed, and it was always something that like that's gonna happen. And like you said, that's a really privileged like kind of mindset to have. And like both of my parents ended up going to college, and then both now teach at community college, like in Hollister, Gilroy, or whatever. And so like it was just this thing that was like kind of expected, kind of like, of course I'm gonna do that, of course I'm gonna like go into that. But like you said, with like FAFSA and stuff, or with application processes, it was like both of my parents were first-gen college students, so kind of like fumbled their way through their college experience. And then that was like what, 20 years ago at least, and like I don't know, they're not like currently involved with like private school stuff or even like applying to UCs now. And so it's like a really complicated process of like, where am I applying, like what makes a good application, how does financial aid work? It's like a mess every year. Like it's so much to think about. I don't know. And I think that that's something that I also never really realized, that like, okay, going to a private school, so many of these people have those resources that like really guide you through all of those steps, and that a private school or even like an Ivy League for them was what was expected. It wasn't just college. It was like they expected to go to an Ivy League, or even like they expected to go to Columbia specifically. And that's something that was very different from me, and very different from like, I mean, I went to San Diego High School. Like it was like, okay, we had like, maybe we had a college fair. I forget. Like we went on like a trip maybe to like see some of the like state schools down south, but it was, of course, college is pushed for everybody. Like go to college. That's how you'll like create a like career for yourself and like sustain yourself. But I think also I would be interested to hear like how your private high school pushed college. Like what was that like? What was the goal of college? Was it for us a lot of the time it was pushed, it was like this is how you make a good living and like support yourself, versus I feel like for a lot of people at Columbia it was something like higher than that. It's like this like higher education as something separate from that.
I think it's really interesting because we have kind of flipped experiences where it's like you had like I guess a public grade schooling experience, and then you transfer into like this different like environment.
Yeah.
I'm like coming from this private schooling grade experience, and then I'm into like the public, and so I think it definitely was like different in how the high school I went to Bishop O'Dowd in Oakland, and so it's like a lot of what you're talking about with Columbia just condensed into a high school thing. Like a lot of the kids who go there will be legacies, and it will be like a lot of them, their parents have gone there for generations to come, and they knew that their kids are going to Bishop O'Dowd, and like it's a really big thing to them, and they're paying the $20,000 a year to go to high school, just doing it, and it's like nothing to them, and it's just a different environment, I guess. Out there, I would say that college was almost, I just don't even know how to frame it. Like, it was framed as something that she would do in order to get a job and in order to do a career, but it was framed less as like, I guess, especially to the other kids who were more wealthy, it was framed as if just something to do, you know, like not something that you had to do or that if you didn't do, your life would be over, but something that if you didn't do, you wouldn't be of the same echelon of everyone else who did it, and that you would be in a different category. And so I think it was more almost like a social thing than it was necessarily like about maybe retaining your economic status or even like being able to survive when you grew up. I think my high school pushed it a lot as like something that if you don't go to college, you won't meet other people who go to college, and you'll grow up and be around a bunch of people who didn't go to college. And so I think that's like a big thing too when we talk about just like how higher education is talked about in general, and kind of like the idea that attending college or any form of higher education kind of makes you a more well-rounded person than others, which was something that was interesting to see, like pushed at such a young age and pushed in high school where ultimately every single child will not go to college.
Yeah.
But then I think when I got here, I kind of, interestingly enough, I mean, like I picked San Jose State because out of the options I had, I kind of just decided like I really wanted, it's gonna sound funny, but like the most generic college experience I could possibly have. I kind of was burnt out from having such a pressurized, like high octane high school experience that I was over it, and I really wanted to have somewhere that's like, we're gonna have homecoming like I've seen in the movies when people went to college, and we're gonna have finals like I see in the movies when people go to college. Like it's not gonna be any type of extreme one way or another. And I think that's definitely what I got in terms of just like the cost of it. Even, I mean, it's only cost like $20,000 a year to go here, which is like a lot, but in the grand scheme of college, not that much in America. It's also like, I mean, the demographics were shocking, but not shocking, because I think that they just changed from high school where it's like a sample size of your community to like where it changes to, I mean, especially for me, like being of color, like a sample size of your community injected into 99.999% either, yeah, like white people, basically.
Yeah.
So definitely the culture shock of, I mean, even going to private school, like we had 30% Black kids because I was in Oakland. And so being in the Bay Area and being around such like, you know, you get told that there's this liberal college experience and that there's like this all super diverse. And it's like diverse is like a bottle of milk with some flakes of salt in it, but
Yeah, no, like I mean, I'm Mexican, I'm Korean, like whatever. Like living in Hollister was very much like, I don't know, so many of my friends are that's like such a big part of like living in Hollister and going to the high school, and like, and then and it's not in Hollister, it's like it's not even that we necessarily have a really large like Latinx population, like as a whole it's like predominantly Mexican, like it's a very specific group, and like that I belong to. And then going to Columbia where like I went in expecting, I was like, okay, I know there's going to be a lot of just white people. Like, I know that. I went in prepared. I was like, okay, it's like the Ivy League, whatever. But on their like percentages or whatever, I don't remember what percent they like advertised was like Latinx or whatever. But one, it was not that large. And then two, when I got there, it was like, okay, this is like so very different. Even if I was only surrounded by like Latinx people at Columbia, it would still be so wildly different from being in Hollister. Like, one, like economic status or like nationality, like there's a lot of international students. And then it's also just like a broader range of like Latinx people. It's not my very specific comfortable home experience,
And I
which is
think
really wild.
you estimate that sometimes, like how much that when you go into like college and you know the demographic is going to be like, no matter where you go, generally predominantly white, how much like effort and how much of an actual activity it is to really build your community and like find people that you will be able to relate with and like even just make friends. I think that people oftentimes underestimate that it is not the same as high school, where there are so many experiences that are just mandated of you. You need to go to lunch at this place with these people. There's no way that you're about to do it for 4 years and not meet any of them. But
Yeah.
you can go to college for 4 years and eat in your dorm all day and
Yeah.
never meet people.
You could
Or
never speak to a single person like outside of maybe like one or two classes that require of it you. And like, yeah. What was I gonna say? Like there's a lot of, I think going to high school, at least especially in my hometown, because it was like, okay, I went to one of maybe 6 elementary schools, and then I went to one of like 3 middle schools, and then we went to the one high school. So my whole town was like at this one high school, and these are people who some people in my class I'd known since I was 5 years old, because it's like that's how my town worked. And then to go, one, have to make entirely new friends and then meet this whole new different demographic of people can be really jarring. And like you said, making friends, finding people who you can be comfortable with, that you're familiar with. I think for me, a big part of the first year especially was like, yes, realizing that like certain aspects of like demographics, whatever, like socioeconomic status or ethnicity and stuff like that does affect how you interact with people, but also that there is a really, we are all very capable of making like good connections with people.
God, I'm so sorry.
You're okay. You're all
Maybe
good.
it's
That
my
happened to
laptop.
me last time. But also that what I was saying is just that I also made very good friends with people who, like, on paper I had never met anybody like them, I guess, or that I was so different from, which is probably one of the things I like have most appreciated about going to Columbia and going to this place that was so different from everything I've experienced, is that I was sort of forced to adapt, but also I do think it was something that was really good for me, and that I've like really had I've really broadened my understanding of basically, I guess not really the world, but like what higher education is, who's going into it, and like I don't know if I hadn't been like directly exposed to these different types of people, if I ever would have really felt like I understood some of the disparities that like we can talk about on paper and stuff, about how your socioeconomic status or your parents' education or all of these factors influence your ability to go to college or to participate in higher education. And like seeing the actual very real like examples of this in my friends or in my acquaintances was something that really prompted a lot of thought in me about like what is higher education and how is our society like working around it, kind of.
Yeah. And then I think that that's like a big deal too, because especially like even when I talk about like just going back to high school, environment is everything. And then it's of course like not only like the mindset you grow up, but the resources you grow up with. And it's different from, have your parents filled out a college application before? Do they know what that looks like? Have your parents had to go get scholarships? Can they help you with that? Like all those types of things, just from like familiarity with it to like, do you have the money for SAT prep to get into the college you want to go to? Have your parents attended a college that they might can help you get into because they were a legacy?
Yeah.
All those things. And I know like I remember being in high school with some of my peers, and it's like my parents had worked like really, really hard just to be able to get me into this high school.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm watching a bunch of people who it's like, the most I could do is pay this tuition. And these people are paying tuition and going to get SAT prep, and then probably going back and then paying the colleges themselves. And even when we look at that, a lot of people implicated in the Bay Area school scandal were from
Oh
my
yeah.
house. So it's just like when we look at all the factors that socioeconomic and social and just education levels all have to do with it, it's kind of sad because college has become almost like we said, like this kind of phase of life that we look at like everybody's going to go through. And so it also breeds an insecurity. And I think people who, when you are kind of told that this is what you need to do, this is what you need to do, this is what you need to do, without the acknowledgement that it's not as easy for everybody to do it. And it's also just not as viable for everybody to do it.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be done for everybody in the same ways. I think that you get a lot of like stigma around it. Like even when we talk about how community colleges may be looked at from people who attend colleges or just in certain circles. Like I know at my high school, it kind of was looked down upon to go to community college. People would look at you like, why would you spend $20,000 a year in high school to then go to a community college? But I think that that kind of ignores the idea that these are all systems that are for certain people, if that's for what you want to do in life. And there are systems that are for other people if that's what they want to do in life. And so I think that it's just so many factors when we look at not only like the viability of going to college, but like the stigma of not going to college and who like is more stigmatized towards that. Because I think when we look at like rich people who don't go to college and they start a business with their parents' money, we're like, oh, this Harvard dropout is so like amazing. But if you drop out of, say, San Jose State and you start working somewhere to support yourself, you'll be looked at as, ugh, this college dropout. Maybe if he would have finished. And I think that that just has a lot of power in not only how children see themselves, like growing up and like the pressure we put on ourselves to like achieve certain things that might not even be our own goals per se. But I think it has a lot to do with how education is shaped and how much they can charge you for education, because a lot of it is paying for the belief that the educated person is of a higher class or is of a different nature than the uneducated person, whatever that means.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And like, yeah, I totally agree. I think like the way it's tying into our education system as a whole and like how we're interacting with this. And like, it's one thing to push college and like that's one argument and like we can go either way on that. But at the same time, it's like, even if we agree that like, yeah, everyone should go to college, like it's such a great experience, you learn so much, you broaden your horizons, you like develop as a person, then it's like, okay, you can promote this as much as you'd like, but if you're doing that without acknowledging how much more difficult it is for some people than others, it's like you're only putting this additional pressure on people who are probably feeling more pressures in other areas of their lives than this other group. And it's like if we're not structurally supporting everybody equally to get to college, it's additionally just kind of like additionally messed up of us to be like, oh, you didn't go to college, like that makes you like worth less, or that makes us view you in a different way when we're just not acknowledging like how different it is.
Yeah, I just think there's definitely a system of making it hard for poor people to go to college and then blaming poor people for not going to college for other people. And that is something that is difficult to change. But I guess if we're gonna wrap up this little series, I think something that a lot of people who are listening would want to know is just what's something that maybe you wish you had somebody to tell you before, or maybe that you just knew in general before you started college.
I mean, okay, for me coming from like an Ivy League or whatever, I think that a lot of people rest so much on like their worth or their what they've done so far or like what they will be able to do on a college admission letter. And for me, especially thinking about private schools or any sort of school that's really competitive in general, even if we're talking about like public school versus private school, whatever, any school that's like competitive, it's like there is, I think, an element of luck. And for me to sit here being someone who goes to Columbia and say like, oh yeah, I wish I knew like how to write this essay specifically, or what extracurriculars to do, or how to do all of these things. Many of those things can help you, and there are lots of resources that like are hopefully are becoming more accessible to people to access like on these steps. But also, to even advocate for any of those like myself without just acknowledging that like a good deal of this is going to be how whoever was reading your application like felt that day or felt about one random thing they saw is like a little bit disingenuous, and it makes the admissions process so much more stressful if you're viewing all of these things as like real indicators of your intelligence or your worth or how far you're going to be able to get in whatever plan you have set out for yourself. It's like, if you are really determined to do something, become a doctor or become a lawyer, or I don't know, become a philosopher or a mathematician or whatever it is you really want to be able to do, like the college that you go to or the path that you take to get there is not really going to be that reflective of like your own worth and your own like capabilities. And just that if I was doing this all, I would keep that in mind a little bit more, even when you're receiving acceptances that feel great. It's like there are other people who are probably just as qualified.
I think that my thing would be along similar lines, but just I think that if I could look at freshman me and tell him one thing about just college in general, it would be to understand the difference between the college experience you want and the college experience others want for you. Because I think that I spent a lot of time just really burning myself out in high school, like extracurricular after extracurricular, like making sure I did amazing on my tests and like all this, and making sure I barred the standardized tests and all that type of stuff. Yeah. And it was like, you burnt yourself out only at the end to decide that like the experience you want didn't require that. And so, I mean, I just ended up with acceptances to places where it was like, you've worked for, and at some point, whether you choose it, I think, before you accept or join whatever college you enter, or maybe even if you realize it after the fact, or if you realize it a decade down the road, you are gonna wanna live your life for you and not for what other people have decided for you. And I just think that I spent a lot of time working towards a goal that I didn't want. Like, I never wanted a really high pressure college experience. I kind of wanted a break after high school, and I wanted to have a less like private, like less rah-rah experience, I guess, out of schooling. And so I definitely got that in the end, but I think I spent a lot more time, not to say that like, not to put San Jose State as like a bottom of the barrel university, because it's a good one, but it just didn't maybe like require, well, actually it didn't require at all. They don't look at extracurriculars. And so if I had known that this is what I wanted for myself when I was a freshman, and I had known like the path that I wanted to go on, as opposed to just allowing college to be something that someone told me it was a good idea, had to do it. And even now, I think that being in college is probably still to a degree has a lot to do with the fact that somebody has in my whole life ingrained into me that it was a good thing to do. But I think if I'd known that I wanted this experience I wanted out of it, then I would have saved myself a lot of strife doing what other people were telling me to do for the experience they thought I should have. And I think that that's the biggest thing that has to do with higher education in general, is just that higher education is a setup for the life you want to have later on in life. And it can also be nothing. You can never use your degree. But it isn't helpful to anyone to pursue higher education for the goals of someone else, or because they think it's something they should do, because it costs too much money and it's too much effort and it takes up too much of your life. Yeah, well, I'll just say thank you guys all for listening to our podcast today. We hope you guys enjoyed it, and we'll be back next week.
Bye.